Imagine a creature whose ancestors walked alongside the dinosaurs. It weighs barely 25 grams, wrapped in a bizarre coat of dark fur, equipped with a duck's bill, a beaver's tail, and webbed feet. It possesses no venomous fangs, no rows of razor-sharp teeth, and no terrifying speed. It doesn't hunt in packs, it doesn't roar, and it doesn't terrorize the landscape. Yet, this evolutionary enigma has completely baffled the global scientific community for over 2 centuries, rewritten our fundamental understanding of mammalian biology, and survived every environmental upheaval on the Australian continent. When the first specimen was shipped across the ocean, European scientists declared it an absolute hoax, a stitched-together Frankenstein monster designed to trick the sophisticated minds of the old world. They literally took scissors to the pelt, trying to find the stitches that bound the duck's beak to the mammal's body. But there were no stitches. This was a masterclass in evolutionary resilience, born and bred in the ancient waterways of Australia. Today, we are diving deep into the hidden world of this living fossil to uncover how a creature that seemingly makes no biological sense became one of the most perfectly adapted survivors in the entire animal kingdom. We will look at how it thrives in the freezing mountain streams of the southeastern ranges, navigates the murky billabongs of the deep bush, and possesses a secret weapon so sophisticated it rivals the high-tech sonar of modern military submarines. This is the story of an Australian icon that defies the laws of nature. Let's begin with the identity crisis that shook the scientific world. In the late 18th century, the unique biodiversity of Australia was just starting to filter back to Europe, leaving naturalists utterly bewildered by the strange creatures hopping, climbing, and crawling across the southern landmass. In 1799, a unique pelt arrived at the British Museum in London, sent from the temperate river systems of New South Wales. George Shaw, a prominent keeper of natural history, stared in utter disbelief at what looked like a mammalian paradox. It was the platypus, known scientifically today as Ornithorhynchus anatinus. The genus name translates from the Greek as bird remnant or bird beak, while the species name simply means duck-like. Shaw spent days examining the skin, convinced that some clever Chinese sailors or colonial pranksters had sewn the beak of a waterfowl onto the body of an aquatic rodent. He even used a pair of shears to cut into the dried skin near the base of the bill, fully expecting to find the thread used by the counterfeiters. What he found instead was a genuine, seamless anatomical marvel that defied classification. For the next 80 years, a fierce intellectual war raged across the scientific societies of Europe. Was it a mammal? Was it a bird? Was it a reptile? The platypus simply refused to fit neatly into the rigid boxes of Western taxonomy. It took the discovery that this furry creature actually lays soft, leathery eggs, yet feeds its hatched young with milk secreted directly through its skin, to force science to create an entirely new category, the monotremes, an ancient lineage of egg-laying mammals found almost exclusively on the Australian continent. For millions of years, the platypus remained a quiet master of its freshwater domain, completely isolated from the rest of the world. Long before the first European vessels sighted the coast of Australia, the indigenous peoples of the land had lived alongside the animal for millennia, weaving its existence into rich cultural narratives. In the dreaming stories of the Aboriginal peoples, the platypus was often described as the wise descendant of a forbidden love affair between a lonely water rat and a young duck who had strayed too far from her flock. This beautiful cultural explanation perfectly mirrored the physical confusion the animal would later cause modern science. But beneath that comical, mismatched exterior lies an organism of absolute, uncompromising perfection. The platypus did not achieve its survival through brute strength or aggressive dominance. Rather, it engaged in a delicate, millions-of-year-old dance of co-evolution with the ancient aquatic ecosystems of eastern Australia. It became an integral part of the intricate food webs that tie the mountain streams of northern Queensland down through the winding river systems of Victoria and across the isolated wilderness of Tasmania. The rivers of the Australian bush are highly volatile environments, subject to extreme seasonal shifts from torrential summer floods to drying autumn droughts. To survive here, an animal cannot rely on simple biological tricks. It requires an anatomy that functions like a living Swiss Army knife. where every single feature has been honed by natural selection to perform under pressure. Then came the true test of this evolutionary design, the dramatic transformation of the Australian landscape. Over vast geological epochs, as the Australian landmass drifted north and grew increasingly arid, the lush rainforests that once blanketed the interior began to recede, leaving behind the dry outback and isolating the freshwater river systems. The platypus was forced to adapt to a shrinking, highly competitive aquatic network. While other ancient species vanished into the fossil record, unable to cope with the shifting climate and changing waterways, Ornithorhynchus anatinus doubled down on its specialized lifestyle. It sought refuge in the deep pools, overhanging root systems, and muddy banks of the eastern river basins. For a semi-aquatic mammal, the transition through these climatic shifts meant refining its hunting strategy to an absolute art form. The gravelly riverbeds and clay banks of the Australian bush are home to a vast array of macroinvertebrates, insect larvae, and small crustaceans like yabbies. But finding these tiny, buried creatures in dark, turbulent, or muddy water presents a massive challenge. If you submerge yourself in an Australian creek, the water is frequently clouded with silt, offering near-zero visibility. For almost any other mammal, hunting in these conditions would mean starving. Yet, for the platypus, entering the water is like stepping into a brightly lit buffet, where every single movement of its prey is illuminated in high definition through a sensory system that seems closer to science fiction than terrestrial biology. Let's dissect the anatomy of this Australian survivor and look at what makes it so incredibly well equipped for life in the bush. When you look at a platypus on the banks of a creek in Victoria or Queensland, it doesn't appear formidable. It's compact, streamlined, and low-slung, with a body length ranging from 40 to 50 centimetres for males, while females are slightly smaller. A fully grown adult weighs anywhere between 1 to more than 2 kilograms, rarely the weight of a standard bag of flour or a couple of loaves of bread. You could easily cradle a mature platypus in your arms, yet within this modest frame lies one of the most sophisticated bioengineering designs on the planet. The fur that covers the body is an absolute masterpiece of natural insulation. It consists of two distinct layers, a dense, incredibly fine underfur that traps a layer of air right next to the skin, and a longer layer of coarse guard hairs that seal the coat, making it entirely waterproof. This dual-layer system is so efficient that even after spending hours diving in the freezing alpine streams of the Australian Alps, the platypus's skin remains bone dry. The tail, broad and flat like a paddle, serves a dual purpose. While it looks like it should be used for propulsion like a beaver's tail, the platypus actually uses it primarily for steering and as a storage unit for fat reserves, which it relies heavily on during the lean winter months in Australia. But the true genius of the platypus lies hidden within its famous duck-like bill. To the touch, this bill is not hard and rigid like a bird's beak at all. It is soft, flexible, and covered in a moist, rubbery skin that feels like fine leather. This structure is actually an extension of the animal's jaw, packed with an astronomical network of highly specialised nerve endings. When a platypus dives beneath the surface of an Australian river to hunt, a remarkable physiological event occurs. It completely closes its eyes, its ears, and its nostrils. It becomes functionally blind, deaf, and unable to smell. It navigates the dark, churning waters of the billabong using a sixth sense called electroreception, combined with mechanoreception. The skin of the bill is dotted with roughly 40,000 electroreceptors and tens of thousands of pushrod mechanoreceptors. The electroreceptors detect the tiny, microscopic electrical fields generated by the muscle contractions of its prey, such as a tiny shrimp flicking its tail or a dragonfly nymph wriggling under a rock. Simultaneously, the mechanoreceptors detect the faint pressure waves and ripples travelling through the water. By processing the microscopic time difference between the electrical signal hitting the bill and the physical pressure wave arriving, the platypus's brain can calculate the exact distance, direction, and speed of its prey in pitch darkness. It is a biological version of the three-dimensional targeting systems used in modern naval warfare, allowing this gentle mammal to locate a buried yabby with absolute precision once the prey is located. The reproductive and feeding machinery of the platypus takes over, and here the numbers reveal just how intense its lifestyle is. The platypus possesses no teeth in adulthood. Instead, it uses rough, keratinous grinding pads located at the back of its mouth to crush its food, mixing it with river gravel stored in its cheek pouches while submerged, before returning to the surface to swallow. Because its metabolic rate is exceptionally high for an egg-laying mammal, an adult platypus must consume up to 20% of its own body weight in food every single day. This means a single animal spends upwards of 12 hours a day executing up to 1,500 individual dives across the riverbed, constantly sweeping its bill from side to side in a characteristic motion known as scanning. When the breeding season arrives in the late Australian winter and early spring, the complexity of their behaviour deepens. After an elaborate courtship ritual involving synchronised swimming and tail holding in the water, the pregnant female retreats to a deep, specialised nesting burrow dug into the clay banks of the river, well above the regular water level. These burrows can extend up to 20 metres into the bank, and the female meticulously blocks the tunnel behind her with plugs of loosened earth to regulate the humidity and protect her sanctuary from rising floods or potential predators like dingoes and carpet pythons inside the darkness of the chamber. She lays 1 to 3 small leathery eggs that are barely a centimetre in diameter, which she incubates by curling her warm, furry tail tightly against her abdomen. After about 10 days, the hairless, blind young hatch out, completely dependent on their mother. Unlike placental mammals, the female platypus lacks nipples. Instead, her milk oozes from modified sweat glands directly onto 2 specialised patches of skin on her belly, where the young lap it up from her fur. The puglies, as young platypuses are affectionately known in Australia, remain secluded in this subterranean fortress for nearly 4 months, growing rapidly on a diet of highly nutritious milk before they ever taste fresh water or see the light of an Australian day. While the young are safe in the burrow, the adult males carry a secret that makes them unique among Australian mammals: a venom apparatus. On the inside of each hind ankle, male platypuses possess a sharp, hollow calcaneus spur connected to a venom gland in the thigh. This venom is highly complex, containing a cocktail of proteins that can cause excruciating, long-lasting pain in humans and can easily incapacitate a rival male during the territorial battles of the breeding season. It is a stark reminder that beneath the docile, oddball appearance of this iconic creature lies a highly complex, evolutionary powerhouse engineered to defend its place in the ancient waterways of the continent. While the biological machinery of the platypus allows it to reign supreme within its immediate habitat, the wider geography of the Australian continent presented an entirely different set of challenges. Historically, the distribution of Ornithorhynchus anatinus formed a continuous ribbon of life along the eastern seaboard of Australia, stretching from the tropical vine-clad creeks of Cooktown in northern Queensland, down through the sprawling river catchments of New South Wales and Victoria, and across the Bass Strait into the pristine wilderness of Tasmania. In these diverse regions, the platypus became a keystone component of the freshwater landscape. However, the unique hydrology of Australia is famously unpredictable. The continent is defined by extreme climate cycles, dominated by the El Niño Southern Oscillation, which can plunge vast swathes of the bush into years of severe drought, followed closely by torrential La Niña downpours that turn quiet creeks into raging inland seas. During periods of intense drought, the interconnected pools and flowing rivers that the platypus relies on begin to fragment. Streams shrink into isolated mudholes, and the aquatic invertebrates that sustain the population vanish. To survive these catastrophic drying phases, the platypus relies on its incredible physiological flexibility, slowing its metabolism, or, in desperate times, making perilous overland journeys through the dry bush to locate permanent water holes, a behaviour that exposes them to terrestrial predators like dingoes and birds of prey. The true disruption to this ancient balance began with the rapid expansion of Odin agricultural and urban development across eastern Australia. As pastoralists cleared the native bush for sheep and cattle grazing, the riverbanks began to destabilise. Without the deep root systems of native eucalyptus and tea trees to hold the soil together, heavy rains washed millions of tons of topsoil directly into the river channels, a process known as siltation. This choked the deep rocky pools where the platypus prefers to forage and destroyed the breeding grounds of the river gravel macroinvertebrates. Simultaneously, the construction of massive water storage dams and irrigation networks across major river systems like the Murray-Darling Basin permanently altered the natural flow regimes of the waterways. Cold water released from the bottom of deep reservoirs lowered downstream temperatures, disrupting the seasonal cues that trigger the platypus breeding cycle and reducing the abundance of their prey. In many parts of agricultural Australia, the once continuous populations became severely fragmented, isolating groups of animals into small, disconnected pockets of habitat where genetic diversity began to decline, leaving them highly vulnerable to local extinction. In addition to habitat modification, the introduction of foreign species to the Australian environment introduced a wave of unprecedented pressures. European foxes and feral cats, brought to Australia during the 19th century, quickly established themselves as efficient apex predators in the bush, actively hunting young platypuses when they ventured into shallow water or attempted to migrate across land between drying billabongs. Even more insidious was the widespread use of enclosed opera house yabby traps in freshwater creeks. These submerged traps, designed to catch freshwater crustaceans, proved to be an absolute death sentence for air-breathing aquatic mammals. A platypus, lured into the trap by the scent of yabbies, becomes trapped underwater and unable to surface for air, will drown within minutes. For decades, thousands of platypuses drowned silently in the rivers of New South Wales and Victoria due to these recreational traps. It wasn't until sustained campaigns by wildlife conservationists and rigorous scientific reporting highlighting the catastrophic impact on the species that Australian state governments stepped in, progressively banning the use of these deadly traps in public waterways to afford the iconic monotreme a fighting chance at survival. Yet, despite these cumulative historical pressures, the platypus has demonstrated a level of resilience that continues to surprise researchers across Australia. Unlike many other native mammalian species that vanished rapidly following European settlement, the platypus managed to hold its ground in many urbanised and agricultural landscapes, utilising hidden urban creeks and farm dams as surrogate habitats. This survival is a direct testament to the animal's ancient evolutionary programming. Because it evolved in a land defined by environmental extremes, its entire biology is built around adaptability and resourcefulness. It doesn't require pristine, untouched wilderness to thrive. It simply requires clean, flowing water, stable clay banks for burrowing, and an abundant supply of small aquatic creatures. As long as these fundamental ecological baselines are maintained, this bizarre, egg-laying survivor proves that it can adapt to the modern world just as effectively as it adapted to the prehistoric shifts of the Australian continent, continuing its quiet, subaquatic existence right beneath the feet of modern civilization. Securing the future of this Australian treasure requires a profound shift in how we interact with the natural world, moving away from destructive exploitation toward a philosophy of respectful coexistence and ethical observation. For over 2 centuries, science strove to conquer and classify the secrets of the bush, but the modern era demands a more humbled approach to wildlife appreciation. When tracking the elusive platypus along a shaded billabong in New South Wales or the mountain streams of Queensland, the golden rule is absolute non-intrusive patience. These animals are highly sensitive to low-frequency vibrations and sudden movements. The heavy footfalls of a careless observer along a clay bank can collapse fragile nesting burrows, trapping vulnerable puglies within the earth, or scare a foraging adult away from its vital 12-hour feeding routine. Ethical encounters mean sitting quietly at a distance during the twilight hours of dawn and dusk, scanning the surface for the characteristic V-shaped wake and the gentle silver bubbles that signal a diving monotreme. By using binoculars rather than approaching the water's edge, and keeping domestic dogs strictly on leads away from sensitive riparian zones, we ensure that our curiosity does not translate into ecological stress for a species that has already given so much to our understanding of evolutionary history. Furthermore, protecting the platypus across the modern landscape of Australia means addressing the large-scale systemic health of our freshwater networks. Innovative citizen science initiatives, such as tracking environmental DNA or eDNA, by simply testing a cup of river water for microscopic skin cells and mucus shed by the animals, are revolutionizing how biologists monitor hidden populations without ever having to trap or handle a single individual. This non-invasive technology allows local community groups across the Australian continent to map the presence of the platypus in real time, identifying critical corridors that require urgent revegetation and water quality protection. It is a beautiful intersection of cutting-edge modern science and deep environmental stewardship, proving that our technological advancements can be used to safeguard rather than conquer the delicate balance of the wild. Ultimately, the story of Ornithorhynchus anatomus is a powerful reminder that our planet is far more complex, beautiful, and surprising than our rigid human categories often allow us to see. This small, furry, duck-billed enigma didn't survive millions of years by being a biological joke or a collection of evolutionary scraps. It survived by being an absolute masterpiece of adaptation, tailor-made for the beautiful, volatile freshwater ecosystems of Australia. It stands as a living bridge to our deep prehistoric past, a quiet resident of the rushing creeks that has watched continents drift, climates change, and empires rise and fall. As we look forward into the uncertainties of the 21st century, ensuring that the ancient waterways of the bush continue to ripple with the